It's very curious. So I think I will start asking you about the question, like you can make your introduction of yourself, how a journalist became the guru of innovation for corporates, you know? So,
All
and
right.
then there's like when you can introduce yourself with a story.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I think I always have been interested in understanding how innovation happens, both in startups and in larger companies. And so I did, I started off as kind of a journalist / technologist, where my first few jobs were in management consulting, thinking about emerging technologies and new media forms. And then I got a job for the Boston Globe, where I met my two co-founders of Innovation Leader, and we were thinking about, okay, what does the Globe need to build for the internet? The Boston Globe was owned by the New York Times company, and so we were inside a larger publicly traded company that was concerned with its brand and how its brand looked on the web. And so, I have always really just enjoyed, I enjoyed working on innovation and new technology in that context of being at the New York Times and the Boston Globe. And then, I spent a lot of time after that traveling around the world, for Wired magazine and Fast Company, and kind of, just really being motivated by trying to understand, what was going to come next in terms of technology, and how were these companies testing it and building it. And so that kind of just led us, in 2013, we started Innovation Leader kind of as a lean startup, just let's see if there's an interest in more content and research and data about how corporate innovation happens, because there's a lot of content about the startup world, and how to raise money if you're a startup, and how to find a co-founder, and how to, build your first prototype and all of that stuff. It felt like there was just less available to corporate innovators. They were going it alone, basically.
Yeah, totally. So welcome, Scott Kirsner, to this Q&A. And that's the question I think is leading very nicely. Why is the main reason companies innovate?
Well, I think that some companies don't feel the urgency or need to innovate. They almost have, I talk about the utility mindset. And so if you think about the typical electric company or water company, in Europe or in the US, right? They're not very innovative because you don't have a lot of choice. Sometimes healthcare can feel that way. If you go to a big hospital, you might feel, if you're insured by a big insurance company, that you didn't get to choose because your employer gave it to you here in the States. That utility mindset for a lot of companies says, we're going to be here forever. The customer doesn't have that much choice. Whatever we do is fine. I think sometimes you see some luxury brands feeling that same way, like, hey, people buy our eyeglasses or our jewelry.
Yeah, our bag, and that's all.
Yeah, because they love the brand, they love the classic look. And so let's just keep repackaging that brand and identity, and maybe extending it in some small ways, but not really innovating. But so, like, what's the reason companies feel like they need to innovate? It's so they don't become irrelevant and die and, slowly atrophy. And I do think a lot of smart leaders realize that if you're not continually innovating, the other problem you run into is the best and smartest people don't want to work for you, because all you're doing is you're being a utility, or you're being the caretaker of a brand. And that's just boring for smart people.
Totally. It's the part of keep system running, This is working, we sell max, and that's all. This is this mindset that is working, we are making money, we continue working to make money until everything crashes.
Right. And, look, let's not disrespect or knock the people who are very good at sales and, and operations, and that stuff is important. And I think most large companies do need a lot of that mindset of, how are we going to keep customers happy today? And how are we going to get them to buy just a little bit more from us tomorrow? And just that, that continual growth stuff is important. But I think a lot of companies get way too focused on that, often because they're publicly traded and they have to answer to shareholders, and they're spending very, very little time thinking about, what is next for us, what's changing about the customer that is going to have an impact, what's changing about purchase habits and things like that.
Yeah, which areas do companies usually innovate in when you are working with them?
What areas of their business do they tend to innovate in? I mean, I think a lot of the innovation that gets attention is the stuff where they're experimenting with emerging technologies, and it's like, oh, let's see how we might use 3D printing to improve our the speed of our prototyping, or let's see if augmented reality glasses might help people on an assembly line do their job faster with fewer mistakes. And so often it's that, often they're innovating with some cool new emerging technology that they are excited about, that they know if they put it in a press release or they put it out on the web, that, other companies will see, oh, Scott's company has robots in the aisles of their grocery store to clean up spills or, mop the aisles or whatever. And isn't that cool? So I think that's where a lot of energy and focus goes, because it makes a good story and it makes a good press release. But often that stuff does not really deliver what the company is looking for, which is like revenue growth and cost savings.
Yeah.
And I do think cost savings and efficiency is one of the areas where innovators can deliver a lot of value for companies, but it's not as sexy as let's put a robot in the aisles of our store and customers are going to see it and they're going to go like, wow, that grocery store is so progressive and advanced because they have robots in the aisles.
Yeah, totally. And this is one of the science fiction dilemma, in innovation, totally. How do you help corporations to understand really what is innovation? Like it's not this kind of flying cars, science fiction dilemma.
Yeah. I mean, I think we try to oversimplify things sometimes just because that's helpful. And, largely in most companies, there's kind of, there's a few kinds of innovation, right? You could say there's cultural innovation of like, let's change the way we do things and how it feels to work here. And then there's probably product or service innovation, right? So you could really draw that line and say, look, there's internal stuff about processes and how you listen to ideas from people. And then there's the product and service innovation, and you could simplify things into those two. I think on the product and service innovation, you could further say, gee, McKinsey's model of 3 horizons is a pretty good way to divide that sort of innovation. What is the near term, midterm, long term, or they say horizon 1, 2, and 3. That's a pretty good way to think about how much resources should we be putting in each of those, those horizons or time frames. And I do think that, thinking about the types of innovation that a company wants to do and has support to do is really important, because I think a lot of people get confused and it's like, okay, so let's do cultural innovation and try to change how it feels to work for this company and how we value our employees and listen to their ideas. And let's also do product and service innovation. And furthermore, let's look for some startups who might be able to help us do those 2 kinds of innovation, or let's find some academic labs that might be able to help on our horizon. And so it can get messy very quickly. And I don't know if you found the same thing, but like a lot of what's important if you're being given responsibility for innovation in a large company is envisioning like, what is going to be your impact in year 1 that's measurable, and then in year 2, what's going to be your impact that's measurable. I mean, I think we see too many people and teams where their first 2 years is kind of a lot of experiments and a lot of exploration and a lot of meetings with other people at their company, but at the end of 2 years, they haven't really delivered anything tangible, and that's a very dangerous place to be, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think when I was doing corporate innovation myself, I think the first thing I did, like I observed, like no one was talking to no one.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like how we are going to innovate if they are not this information flow everywhere and they are not used to work together. So my first point was like, hey, break the silos completely and bring people together. And it was tough because they were not used to, but at the end we did it. And I think that's the main thing, this kind of mindset. And when they have embedded the mindset with some kind of activities, then it's when you can do whatever, because even there they are looking for how I can do this differently, how I can, the normal job they are doing, or if they have to look for a solution, they are already looking not at the typical things. So I think the first one, I think, is, well, see what is happening in your company, the dynamics, and then is to change completely this first. I think first is the leadership, and then is, of course, you need KPIs, like innovation is important.
Yeah.
Because if not, they are not. So it's like, start for funny, for the performance. So like you have to have these ideas, number of ideas. And this is getting into the performance, review. So they have to have something. And then it's like, okay, you have to implement at least one project the first year. They have to actively, really, it's on the money bonus. Like,
yeah,
to do something.
That's important, right? Giving it some teeth so that people are paying attention.
Yeah, totally. But I think this is, for me, one of the super mega, basics. So the next question is
I would can I just add on to that comment that you made? I mean, I think that talking to people and doing some cultural anthropology in the company, understanding where are the pockets that historically innovation has come from and how does that get adopted or rolled out, right? All of that is important, but I don't think you can spend 18 months or 2 years just doing that. I think at
3 months.
Point,
so have to start in 3 months.
Right. And I do think, one of the real tensions of this job is that you do need that support and engagement with lots of people in the company over time, but you can't spend 60, 70, 80% of your time having meetings with people, trying to explain what you're doing and get their buy-in and see if they can lend you some resources, right? Like then you're not getting anything done. And so this job is a tension between that diplomatic role, the anthropology role of like understanding what we're trying to change and who we need on our side to change it, and then actually doing stuff and building stuff. You need to make sure you have the time to do that. Yeah,
totally. Yeah, for sure. And plus the collaborations, okay, not to have the classical SAP, SAP solutions, but who is doing this for this team, and bring to the team this kind of inspiration and as well research from labs, universities. Yeah.
And I think it's, so this is a hard job, and that's kind of why we exist, right? Is, it's, if it was formulaic, if someone could hand you the sheet of paper and say, here are the 10 steps to doing this job successfully, it'd be great. And I also think that, one of the biggest challenges, which we could talk about, is just, is convincing people in the company that this innovation group or these innovation practices are here for the long term, that this is not just a team that's going to be here for 2 years or 3 years, and then the CEO will be on to some new trend or some new idea.
Yeah, I think that's part of the how you change people is when at the end will be like the legacy, and that's when I left the company. For me, it was always like, they are still there, they are still doing innovation. And I think 10 years after, I went there for one event, and I saw the workplace was super innovative with a lot of, wow, that's incredible. And they were still doing all the activities I set up because I saw in the screens and so on. I was like, oh my God, really? I made a legacy, like this kind of, when you transform people from inside, like you can have this. And even if other departments, they remove the innovation, they were still having one because they believe in this. So that's for me is like, that's why when I learn, okay, that is working, like how to start with the basics,
Yeah, I like metaphors. And so one of the metaphors I often use is, a lot of companies, they're like people who go to who make a New Year's resolution that they're going to get in shape. And so they go to the gym a lot in the month of January. And then by February 1st, they're back on their sofa eating cupcakes and watching Netflix. And then the rest of the year, they just kind of go back to the old practices. And so what you saw was like, okay, so this is a company that not just went to the gym in January, but kept going in February, March, April, and, and it became a habit as opposed to this passing phase.
Yeah, it's like everyone, when you want to do a diet or you want to change your lifestyle,
Yeah.
And can you talk about the idea of an innovation deficit? And what is that, and how the companies know if they have one?
Well, I came up with this idea with talking with some colleagues of, people, as you said, they want metrics and they want KPIs about, how they're doing and what's going on. And so I was going to just look for some of the questions that we asked, but the idea was, the idea is basically this last year with the pandemic, there's been so much going on that's been very urgent in large companies, right? They've had to figure out, what do we do with our retail stores, and, how do we support?
Yeah, suddenly, like.
Yeah, suddenly the digital interface becomes really important to them. And they've had to figure out how to get people collaborating productively from home. If you're in healthcare, suddenly telemedicine became very important. And so we kind of said, let's put together a list of questions that might suggest that you are hopefully exiting the pandemic with a bit of an innovation deficit. And so we kind of defined 4 levels from, no deficit at all to extreme deficit. And some of the things we ask are like, are you seeing C-suite leaders who are kind of immersed in fire drill issues, like their supply chain is broken, they can't get enough of this particular component. And so suddenly manufacturing has stopped. So are the C-suite leaders not really focused on the future? They're focused on near-term problems. Are you having trouble talking to customers and getting signal from your customers because you're not able to hang out in a store or go visit them at home and see how they use your product? Do you feel like you're getting less time with some of the key business unit leaders that you need to have on your side when you're ready to deploy stuff? We're just not communicating. There's so much noise in the organization that we're not able to communicate internally what we're trying to do, how people can get involved, what we're succeeding at. And so it's really like we created a probably less than 5-minute assessment that people can do on our site to understand and maybe show around to their team, like, hey, I think we have an issue here coming out of the pandemic where, this has been a very intense period of near-term problems, and making sure that employees are safe and that customers are going to be safe. And that has been very important in 2020 and 2021, but it's not about midterm and long-term innovation and growth and thinking about, what customers want next. I think you'll see a lot of big companies out of the pandemic where they just kind of want to go back to the way things were before, and as an example, I would say, here in Boston during the pandemic, I had one experience of getting a COVID test where you didn't leave your car, the hospital, and there was no paperwork at all. Everything was online and digital. I think there may have been some phone interaction, but drive to the hospital, you roll down your window, they give you the COVID test, and then you get the results. And to me, that was like, oh, this is the future of healthcare. I don't have to leave my car. It's like ordering Starbucks. And now I just went to my doctor's last week, and it's like, oh, great. You go to the office, you sit in the waiting room, they hand you the clipboard with paper on it, forms that you filled out 7 times before. And so it was interesting to see healthcare go back to all of its old ways. And I think a lot of businesses are going to feel that gravitational pull of like, let's just do things the way we always have done them.
Yeah, I think like, because it was too much of change so fast, like they want to say, no, I want to go to my cocooning.
Yeah.
1 second more, like.
Yeah. And I also think, there's a lot of interesting conversations to have about the future of office work in the office and remote work. And I do think there's plenty of team leaders and business unit leaders in big companies where, their authority and status is about, hey, I see my 20 people are here in the office working today. And so they want that to come back. Even if those 20 people,
they don't want
17 of them might feel like I'm much more productive if I don't have to come into the office. And so how do you resolve that issue? And I think we're going to see already here in the US, I haven't been following Europe, but there is a huge amount of job switching that's happening in 2021. And I think that's only going to accelerate as smart, talented people just kind of make the decision of, you know what, maybe I do love to go into the office every day, but I want to work in a smaller company where I feel like my ideas are more valued.
Yeah, totally.
Or I would like to go in once a month. That's about the right, I'll go in once a month for a day of meetings and
for
the
coffees. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think in Europe, they have the deadline end of the year to have everything remotely or going only once per month or every 2 months. And then the small companies, they are going more to the office. Like the corporates are more remotely now still. So I think it could be super interesting to see this tension between the directors or the head of departments and the employees, this kind of revolution and how they answer and manage this.
Yeah. There's research from before the pandemic that shows that if you're someone who's doing routine tasks, you're going through invoices and looking for mistakes, or you're handling customer support calls, there's research that shows that doing that remotely for most people is much more productive. Yeah. I think the big question is, if you're a team that is creative and generative, what is going to be the right mix of in-person and remote? Because I don't know anybody who really loves Zoom collaboration or Microsoft Teams collaboration if they had the alternative of, let's get together in our room and we'll put big sticky notes on the walls all over, and we'll drink coffee together, and we'll, eat donuts in the morning or have like a nice lunch together and really feel like, oh, we are a group of people trying to tackle a big problem together. There's just something about the energy of digital that in some ways doesn't facilitate that. I think in others, digital can be good, but I think, I'm looking forward to seeing some case studies of teams that find that right balance of, let's get together in person and let's also use Mural and Miro and Remo and Sophia and all of these great digital platforms to get the best of remote.
Yeah, I think because brainstormings are not every day, it's like when you can schedule this 1 per month office activities. But I think my experience, we are all remote, and because we are like this, and sometimes we are missing to have this kind of physical experience, but it's not possible at all. So what we are doing is a lot of audio. So we are like to keep this kind of super creativity is when via WhatsApp, we share a lot of examples or stories or something when we try to solve a problem. And we are sending out asynchronous, audio files. I am thinking, like it's more philosophical. I think you see, do you like, how do you say this? And then maybe it's 10 minutes audio. And then when the other person is ready or whatever, they are sending another audio with another part of philosophy. And this is how we are solving this kind of problems, like sending examples and other pictures depending on the topic, and a lot of conversations asynchronous.
Yeah. I also think, voice is great, whether it's asynchronous or, I've been spending some time in the Clubhouse app over the last few months, both with like public conversations and then also some closed private conversations. But Slack has some audio capabilities of doing real-time, calls with your team. And so I like the example that you shared, because I think we're all trying to, or we will be trying to get to that right balance of, the energy of in-person with some of the more egalitarian aspects of digital, right? Where there might be people who are afraid to, or just don't know how to jump into a conversation in person if they feel like, oh, this is the more senior people who are talking. But if you're on Mural, they will put a sticky note on the Mural board with a fantastic idea, and everybody will say, wow, that's a great idea. I'm glad that you shared that.
Yeah. But then you can maybe not explain sometimes. So the last question, Scott, is like, what are the processes a company, so a big corporation, adopts innovation from startups and from research results from universities?
Yeah, I think that, the real core issue is, acknowledging that often academic research, is going to be a very long-term collaboration. And so defining, here are the themes that we're interested in over the next 5 or 10 years, and making sure that you're, communicating what's coming out of the academic labs that you may partner with, or maybe that you're getting some shared interns who've worked in great universities and then want to come and spend a summer or a few months at your company, trying to, to deploy some of those ideas or build prototypes around them. So I think academic research is one thing. I think with startups, the core best practice is really just getting the key players in your business to define the problems or the areas that they think they need help with, and really being clear in communicating externally, like, hey, here are some of the areas we're most interested in, the solutions we're looking for, and letting startups kind of find you, as opposed to feeling like you need to travel the world and constantly be casting this wide net for every interesting startup. And that's a challenge for a lot of large companies, because they feel like anytime they communicate, we are interested in, using electric motors for this instead of gas motors, they feel like that is the biggest strategic, disclosure, and that they shouldn't do it.
That's a part of the confidentiality of the true needs of the corporates.
Right. And their competitors already know what they're working on. And it doesn't really matter, but, they just can't get out of their way to explain, what they're working on. Like we are doing a survey right now with this group at MIT called the Industrial Liaison Program. And you ask big companies, what are the key drivers of seeking to interact with startups? And the number one driver, like far and away, is to solve identified business problems. It's not about diversifying into new areas or exploring trends. It's like solving business problems. And the other one is finding products that are complementary to what we sell today, things that plug into what we already sell. And so, that really requires like communication about, here's what we want, here's how startups can help us.
Yeah, totally. And this analyzed, I think that's one of the most complicated parts from corporates, I think, like really have the time to think and to reflect what they need, really.
Yeah. I think that's definitely true. One thing that was surprising to me over the pandemic period in this research is that I would have thought that most big companies would say that the amount of startup interaction and engagement has decreased during the pandemic. Just because a lot of it was like, let's go visit London and meet with a bunch of fintech startups, or let's go to Tel Aviv and see what's going on there. Let's go to Silicon Valley. And all of that stopped, obviously, in the pandemic. There was no Mobile World Congress, right, to go to in Barcelona. But we saw that 42% of companies in this survey we're doing said that their startup interaction has increased during the pandemic. And 36%. So basically 36% said it stayed the same. So basically 80% of companies said it either stayed the same or increased during the pandemic. Just 20% said that it decreased. So I found that pretty interesting.
Yeah, super cool. So thank you very much, Scott, for this interview.
Thanks for all the great questions. It was really fun for me.
Yeah.